Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts on this September morning. It's already about 75 degrees. Let's see here. It's 10:20 in the morning for me. Can you believe that? Got on my vampire box here. For some reason, the mic was a little low there. So I thought it might be interesting to discuss something that I think some of you think about a lot. Because I do. And I'm just going to give it a name that everybody can kind of understand really quickly, even though I don't think it's the exact proper description of everything, which is the physics of the soul. And what that means to me is you're thinking about your soul. For those of you who are pretty sure you got one from you've deduced it from a ton of experiences that you've had over the years. You're still trying to think, okay, well, how does this thing work, How does it stick to me physically? How do I continue to have this thing? And that's quite a question. We don't have machines that can sense a soul that we're aware of, If you're like me and you're willing to be open to things like ethereal particles creating the entire universe, a little tiny particle with no attribute that simply collides with its partners, according to Faraday and Tesla and Eric Dollard, at 50 times the speed of light, roughly. I'd be really interested to see how they came up with that calculation, to be honest. I've tried to look it up. I need to go rewatch Eric Dollard's lecture since I'm much more in tune with what the guy was trying to teach me while I was watching his videos years ago. So you have to have some sort of relationship between the two, don't you? One has to catch the other. And probably, maybe not the other way around, But here's where it starts to get into a weird paradox. We talk about the tangible. I can touch my two fingers together because of the fortune I've had to accumulate these collision forces into my being of this ether stuff. And it's generally called life, but then again, a rock still has it as well. Let's say a rock doesn't have a soul. But there's this added level of consciousness on top, and then we think, okay, if the soul were tangible in any way, shape, or form, then it could prevent or cause effect with the mass that we have in this, detectable world. And thus we should be able to absolutely see the soul in some form or fashion. It's sort of like if a ghost sat on your bed and had a little butt print on your cushion, then you would know that something is pushing down on that cushion, pushing down on that comforter. You don't know exactly what it is, if it's a ghost of a cat, a ghost of a man, ghost of a woman, some bowling ball running around the universe. So as far as we know, we don't actually see any displacement of any of the mass that's in our universe as a result of a soul. Okay. Isn't that a weird one? I mean, isn't it strange that something could touch you that you can't touch back? Something could walk through you, and you can't walk through it necessarily. For me, it's been a dilemma my entire life of trying to figure that out because we get so accustomed to the connection between the word real and the ability to touch or at least see something occur. I mean, I think lightning's real, but I don't want to ever touch it, you know what I'm saying? But you get light, you get sound, you get heat, you get shocked by lightning. I mean, in terms of emotionally, it's surprising. The interesting thing is we technically get the same thing from other souls because our friends tell us things, surprise us. So we're actually getting the same effect. But it's hard for, I think, most human beings initially to surrender, I guess, the validity of existence away from a physical form. And to be just as affected by the non-tangible things. And we actually are. When you see a movie that makes you cry, makes you excited, makes you cry tears of joy, tears of sadness, makes you get angry, makes your heart rate go up, makes suspense just, put you on the edge of your seat. That's sort of doing the same thing. But what do we always say? It's just a movie. It's just a television show. Da-da-da. Now, when you fall in love for the very, very first time, whether it be with a person or a place or thing, you have that feeling. It gives you a sense of purpose. It's amazing how much it could take you over, So what do we do about this paradox? How do we talk about the physics of the soul? What's the chronology of life as we know it as human beings, from the sperm and the egg getting together? What's interesting about it is that the egg in itself is a subservient vessel of the overall female form. It simply slides down the wall of the uterus and hooks on and waits to see if something occurs. The man penetrates the woman, and then his soldiers are swimming towards the egg. And then, as if it wasn't metaphorical enough, the sperm penetrates the egg. The same thing that's going on in the outside body is going on inside the womb. There's simply one hole in an egg. And this thing pushes in that hole, and the reason why it has a long tail is so that it plugs up the hole behind. Now we know sometimes 2 of them get in there, 3 of them get in there. One of the flaws of in vitro is that they overexpose the egg to sperm, and thus you get octomoms and that sort of thing. And then, of course, there's the anomaly of twins, where things split off and you get duplications. You get, Monogazi twins, and you get maternal twins. But there's this thing I've talked about a couple of times on the show, which is the spark of life. Some little configuration of mass on this side that causes a spark to be registered. And what is a spark? I mean, technically, what is it? It would be ether moving at the speed of plasma, which a lot of folks want to say, well, that's mass speeding up to plasma speed, and thus thermalizing. And it can happen that way. But I think the way you might want to think about it is this 50 times speed of light fabric is slowing down. It's getting caught up inside an aperture of some sort. And during that slowing down process, just like light frequencies that slow down over time, you would see the whole spectrum of the rainbow eventually. Now, I've said recently this year that if you really think about the entire human body and pretty much all living things, we are nothing more than a tube machine. We're tubes, all connected one way or the other. That's why if you eat a hot spice, your ears can hurt, Someone can blow on your nostrils and you'll make a horn out of your mouth. I mean, it's like, we are tubes, man. So that spark of life creates, usually, by the 6th week of incubation inside your mother, there's a little heartbeat going on. And what's interesting is you can actually see this sort of thing in little funny videos online. One of the funny things that people are doing is hooking up like these rubber hoses to exhaust pipes. And it makes this funny sort of burpy farty noise, right? Why is that happening? Well, it's happening because the air is obviously getting hooked into all the kinks in the tube. And then it builds up and then it pops. It builds up and then it pops. And that's where you get the little aperture noise, right? I had to put this hair up, man. It's all over the place. So for me, what I think is occurring there is at a microscopic level, there is an aperture that is sort of acting like a hook. Again, Velcro will be given the credit of being invented in the Roswell crash of 1947. And not to take anything away from that particular event, but Velcro is something that occurs in nature. It's a way that seeds spread in the jungle. There's a little hook, a little loop, and then a hook. And the barb gets on an animal, and the animal bumps into the thing and spreads it around and pollinates. Okay, so natural things occur. So whatever configuration of mass is happening, at some intangible level of probably microscopic nature, of which man cannot sense with the machine, something is attaching our soul to the body. And those cells that are initially building the human form then build away from a central point, the rest of your body. There's a lot of suspicion as to where the soul would truly be connected. The pineal gland is usually our favorite place to talk about. The brainstem is another area where there seems to be a very delicate physical sort of weakness to the life force. So if you get your brainstem broken, you can die instantaneously. Your body's fine. Happened to an uncle of mine. But we know that there's been this sort of chemical assault on the pineal gland. That it is the third eye, that it's in all ancient history. And what's really fascinating about it to me is that we did in prehistoric times, meaning pre-whatever generation we're in now, they discovered this, they figured it out, that there's something in the center of the eye, from the Egyptians to the monks of Asia. They figured this out. You know, the monks of Asia, they had these chants that vibrate at different frequencies, your chakras in your head especially, trying to stimulate it, trying to turn it on. Hindus, very much aware of the third eye. But isn't it interesting, if you just look at the ancient history of various cultures, the eye of the pineal gland, of the third eye, of the gateway to the soul, thus to the Ethernet cable to the universe, it starts to dry up. As soon as you get to Europe, it's pretty much gone. Europe was more concerned about centralizing power through an organized religion. Part of me thinks that if Jesus really existed, for instance, that why wouldn't he talk about more of the details of how to interact with your soul? When, millions of human beings prior to his supposed occurrence on this planet had already been using the third eye as a mechanism to expand their consciousness. Psychedelic drugs, which seem to, again, the natural kind, all right, seem to really get you to engage where we are as human beings. It opens up pretty much all the spiritual realms that your brain can conceive of, and some that you can't until you take it. And the disclaimer with this whole thing is, don't be taking that stuff if you have a really rough life going on, because it can let out all those fears. And if you don't have a huge constitution to see things that might freak you out without yourself getting freaked out, you could potentially do yourself a little bit of damage. It just depends. Again, pretending to be really strong when you're super duper weak and then taking a psychotropic drug is a bad idea. Right? Don't go down to take some ayahuasca trip if you are dealing with anything super intense in your world. That's just my advice. There was the doctor that talked about the fact that when you die, he said that you lose a certain number of ounces out of your body. As if the soul had this weight that was a part of your flesh. Well, if we just take a step back to ethereal sciences, which explains gravity 100% as a push and not a pull, it would mean that for you to gain more weight as a result of your soul, that your soul would actually be blocking ethereal winds to the extent that you gained ounces of weight. No one's been able to replicate that experiment, and what an interesting idea, just to even think about maybe that's possible. And talking to hospice workers about this exact subject, had a friend in Ireland for about a year. And she, and almost everyone who's ever seen someone pass, they always have some version of this description because everyone's words are at a different level. You'll get very eloquent descriptions, and then, like my friend in Ireland, she had seen it so many times working in hospice care that probably borrowing descriptions from other people. But when the life force leaves a human body, there's a bunch of stuff that occurs. I've not personally experienced this, being in the same room with someone as they pass, at least to my knowledge. I can think of some movies I've seen that probably had the chance of doing that to the audience, but whatever. Everyone senses right away that the life force, the personality, and the essence of that human being leaves the room. 100%. The flesh vessel simply becomes a flesh vessel, and it no longer has that mom, dad, whatever, brother, sister feeling, buddy. And what's very interesting is I have a friend of mine right now. She has lost, her stepdad and her father, her biological father and his stepdad, all within, say, 3 years now. And she was in the room for her stepfather. And the description is very, very similar, which is, here you are at the literally edge of a bed. And of course you're initially sort of wishing, hey, don't pass away. There is a stage when you get a little bit more mature that, depending on the age of the individual and their level of suffering and the time that they've suffered, you will actually wish them into the next realm of existence, such that they can be freed from this vessel that's causing them so much pain. But she's described it to me now twice. And she just recently lost her father, and she was not able to be with him physically because he's 1,800 miles away. She said that when these two gentlemen passed, one of which she was in the same room. I don't know if she was in the same room with her father, actually. I don't. But she told me when she learned about the information, in both occasions, one by witnessing it, I think one by being informed, that there was a euphoric envelope around her. That is, it's almost as if as soon as they left, they went straight to her and enveloped her in beauty and said, this is where we are. You don't have to worry, without those words. The other thing that we have to kind of contemplate here, and I've talked about it off and on throughout different shows, but we have this evidence that all systemic life, meaning in my case, what I mean is the parent-to-child relationship is very strong on the spiritual realm as well as in the physical realm. But the physical realm, you could be estranged from your parent. You never met them for whatever reason. Perhaps they passed away. Perhaps they just didn't hang around. But on the other realm, so in this realm, you have no idea where they are, etc. But on the other side, there's evidence that there is a neural net, almost, for lack of a better vision for your mind, that when something happens to you, your parent knows. It got so intense that I believe it was the Germans figured out that there was a chemical change in the mind of a bunny rabbit when one of her offspring passed away. And you can go see this on Dark 5 channel. But he documents the whole thing where they'd have a litter of bunnies. They put one bunny on a submarine for a very secret mission. It would go out to do the secret mission, and it's basically a binary decision. Are threats there or are they not there? And if the threat is there, they kill the bunny rabbit, which means do something. And they would study the bunny rabbits that were still on land, and it was an instantaneous protocol of communication. Amazing, right? Many of you are aware of the story when Elvis almost got into I think he got into a car accident, and his mother was frantic to call him that night and make sure he was okay. I had the exact same thing. I've only had one major car accident here in California back when I was 18 years old. Or my car was actually fine, but the other kid rolled his car because he's being an idiot. But I get home in my apartment, and of course it's shocking. I'm 18, and this is my first car. It's not even my fault. This kid's going to start lying pretty soon here. But on my voicemail at home, on my recorder at home, my mom's leaving me a voice message, which chronologically was right after the accident. Go back an hour and do the math, and it's right after the accident happened. Whatever fear signal I sent out attached to her. And what's very interesting about that, I want you guys to understand, is that my mother and I didn't really have a tight relationship at all. I mean, we're okay, but we definitely I spent the last 8 years of my life not living with her at all. I'd see her once a year, maybe twice a year, because long distance was something that the parents would never pay for. You barely got any phone calls. So there wasn't as tight connection, but she still was connected to me on the spiritual realm, right? There's a fabric there. We are not encouraged, in my opinion, to look at the observable reality of the world and acknowledge it. We are to listen to what I like to call certain left brain idiots, and maybe right brain opportunists, right? Someone who's trying to sell you a bunch of stuff in a guru realm may or may not be a shyster. And that could be just a preacher on a Sunday morning show with 30,000 people in some stadium. They're making big money, telling you what you want to hear, getting paid to pray for you and that kind of stuff. All right. No different than some of the sort of fake shaman out there, fake gurus that get exposed by their people, not by me. But your left brainers are, well, we can't sense it in a machine, so it doesn't exist. You're an idiot. Until we develop the machine that can see the soul, you're an idiot for believing in ghosts, believing in anything spiritual in this realm. And what's interesting about that tiny distinction is that you don't usually think of it like that. Let's replay those statements real slowly in your brain. You're told there's not a soul by scientists just because in the infancy of our electronic history in this world, and the fact that they don't acknowledge the human body as the most beautiful sensory input machine that's ever been created on our plane of existence that we know of, they're telling you that something doesn't exist. And many of them will lament about how foolish you are for thinking it does exist simply by listening to your body, by listening to your mind's eye. Your mind's eye is a very interesting mezzanine between your body-mind consciousness realm. When we observe physical mass energy, which is what we're doing, every day we get out of bed and wake up, we have this certainty that this is what reality is. But then we go to bed and we have dreams. Some of us do. And what's interesting about it is that I've been telling you for years, for instance, that, and I just mentioned this recently, we don't dream about things like space, like outer space. And there's all kinds of theories why we don't dream about outer space. But people who, again, I think the best way to say it is when you play a video game for hours and hours and hours, you can actually dream the mechanism of the video game on top of the action inside your dream. Now, if you watch Star Trek Voyager, or all the Star Trek episodes and all the Star Wars episodes, and you're just ODing on science fiction space travel, you would think that you would at least go to bed one day of 365 days out of the year, if you're a dreamer, and dream about being on the Voyager spaceship or some Enterprise or something, or your own, right? And I'm connected to the guys that did a bunch of those shows in the 90s, and they all admit, my gosh, we've been working on all these different space shows, Battlestar Galactica, none of them have dreamed about being in space. Now, the one thing I forgot to sort of deduce in my own mind was that perhaps where we are going when we are dreaming is a very tangible place, but it's on the spiritual realm, and it is a real place, and space doesn't exist in that location. Therefore, you would not dream of something that isn't there. For instance, if I gave you free tickets to your favorite amusement park around the world, well, do you think you're going to be traveling in space just by going to the amusement park? No, it doesn't exist. It's an amusement park. It's got rides. It's got food. It's got places to chill out. Same thing with your dreams. Your dreams are probably sort of a remnant of what your heavenly realm will be like when you get there. So, take the two. Your mind's eye, in my opinion, is when you're able to overlay your dream world on top of this world. But instead of thinking of your dream world as purely fiction, it is merely a dynamic world of constant creation that is controlled by, in most part, you. Because your dream is almost like a sort of a dress rehearsal for where you're going to be going, where you're really going to be joining other life forces 100%. Your mom, your dad, whoever's on the other side. But when you can overlay the two, and I think it must be just pure enlightenment. It must be, which only means this. You've contemplated the existence of the spiritual realm, and you have allowed yourself to see the unseen. Because as you adapt to this reality and you start cutting off all the other inputs simply because you're a baby and you need to cut it off because you're trying to figure out where the teat is, right? So you can get rid of this feeling in your belly that you're hungry. You need to be held and warmed up. You need to know that you're loved. Babies that are untouched and unloved, they've done tests, they die. Because the souls are like, I'm out of here, man. When I had my couple spiritual experiences, which I'm going to recap the Disney one. I know OG listeners have heard this 100 times, but it's been quite a while since we've gone through this. But since we're on this subject, there was an experience that I had that many of you have already heard, but it was 2008, I think early 2008 in January. I was going to Disneyland, and it's just like 8 miles from where I live right now. And it's a nice day like this, and it was early evening, still totally bright like it is right now. Of course, it's morning right now. But I go in there, and my girlfriend wanted to go to the restroom. It's a cat's bathroom. It's a little bit cleaner at the time. Right in the front, on the right side after you go into the railroad tracks. So I'm just standing there. I'm just waiting. I'm people watching. Got, I think, these sunglasses on. And I had recently, about 3 or 4 weeks earlier, on Christmas Day, I had met an Imagineer by the name of Bob Gurr. It was a very touching meeting I had with him. We talked about Walt. Walt hired him in 1954. It was the last Imagineer that Walt personally hired. The rest of it were hired by sort of subordinates to Walt. But the dude got choked up. He just said, look, Walt was one of the most amazing human beings. Nobody knows what we lost that day. It was truly a loss for the world. And so, it's kind of fresh in my mind. Bob, that is. And so I'm in the park, and I'm, when I go to the park, my conscious filter is to say, I'm really looking for the tiny bits of the park that Walt personally touched on. And the front area is pure Walt. Main Street's pure Walt. The few restaurants you bump into when you get to the belly of the park are totally Walt. A lot of the rides, he personally blessed every single contraption that you're sitting in. So that's the way I see it. And so I'm standing there just looking. And in my mind's eye, okay, because I guess I'm open-minded to this, up walks Walt Disney with, I swear to God, a cigarette in his hand, on his right hand, pinched between his first two fingers, And he motioned with that hand. He said, Bob Gurr's over there. You should go say hi. Just walks past me on my left. It is only in my mind's eye. I don't feel like he's tangibly in this world. But he puts a one of those map pins in my brain as to where Bob is. So my girlfriend and I are hangry. We're going to go to the Kraft Mexican restaurant. We're going to eat barbecue. We're going to probably ride Indiana Jones, maybe Space Mountain, Star Tours, and we're out. That's what we do at night. We have season passes. What do we care, right? When they used to be $368 for the whole year. Plus parking, plus 20% off. They're now like $1,300 or some crazy thing. It's ridiculous. So she comes out. We're walking down the street. We're supposed to go left to the second park of Frontierland. And I just tell her, I just got this pin. I'm sort of in this daze. And I had this pin to go right. And so I tell her, I say, look, you mind if we go this way first? Okay. First, that's a miracle that she wouldn't be like, why are we going that way? I don't want to go over there. I'm hungry, right? I mean, that would be just a natural reaction. But she follows me. And so, and I've, confirmed this with her 100 times. We walk past, the only two rides we ever ride over there is Star Tours, which is an immediate right after this chicken place. And then you go down one more ride and it's Space Mountain. Those are the only two things we ride over there because everything where I'm about to take her is the kiddie rides. Well, I'm being drawn just to the right of Matterhorn. Up to the submarine ride, which is like little kiddie ride. So here we go. I keep walking, and I should have told her what had happened initially, but she gets it afterwards. And so anyway, I walked up, and there's Bob Gurr, his buddy, and we all shake hands, and we have a little conversation. The ride he was supposed to be riding on was a submarine ride that had been rebranded as Finding Nemo, excuse me. It was Imagineer Days, so the whole line of people waiting to get on that ride were all Imagineers with little pins on their thing. So this experience happens. I walk directly to this guy in a place in the park that I would never go. I don't like Matterhorn ride. I think it's too bumpy. And as far as kiddie rides, I'd have to be with a kid. And then I love kiddie rides, but we weren't with any children, right? So I talked to him 10 years later, Bob Gurr. I called him up and I said, hey, I just want you to know what happened. I know I probably sound crazy. And the first thing out of his mouth was, I am not the least bit surprised. He said, you have no idea how much that stuff happens, how many times Walt is witnessed in this park. Another friend of mine named Jimmy, he worked security there for 7 years. He's on the steamboat. And he's security behind the steamboat while this big water parade's going on. And no one can see him, but he's got a buddy about 4 feet to his right. He told me that they heard Walt's voice say, you boys better get back, the boiler's about to blow. He turns to his buddy and says, did you hear something? And his buddy said, well, we better get back. So his buddy also heard it. They moved back, and sure enough, the boiler blew so badly that the ship was out of commission for 6 months. There's a ton of those stories. And it's interesting to me because it's almost like, and I had been detoxed, let's say, if it's 2008, I had stopped using fluoride, stopped microwaving my food, stopped eating crappy food for probably 3 years at that point. And I would say by about 2005, I got rid of all that stuff. My girlfriend, she was always trying to get that stuff out of the house, and I was like, okay, whatever. And then finally I woke up and I realized it. But about 2006, by halfway through 2006, as I've said to you guys several times, I think this is more fluoride based, but I'm not exactly sure. Fluoride seems to be the one thing that you can stop ingesting and it will decrystallize out of your pineal gland. But there was a point when I was freshly awake, hadn't consumed any caffeine of any kind. I was driving out of this block that I live on, and I remember pulling up to an intersection I'd been to for, at least 3.5 years or so. And my mind was working double time. It was almost, I want to say, disturbing on one level because I was like, what am I going to do with all this processor power? for a second, I kind of felt like I had gained an autistic level of consciousness where I started gaining more processors than I needed. And it was very, very interesting. I'll tell you one other thing, as we're trying to talk about the sensory mechanisms being potentially improved through various means. It could be detoxing, which I think everybody needs to do. But now imagine, prior to a lot of toxicity being just put in all of our food, put in the air, and that kind of thing. My buddy Sid Mead, who, for those of you who don't know who he is, it's SYDMEAD.com. You can see the site we put together for him. Master artist, genius scientist. I mean, this guy was crazy. One of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet in your entire life. He passed in 2019. I'm kind of glad he didn't get to see what happened after. But one day we were talking about sort of mind over matter stuff, which is strange because I don't think I mentioned it to him. I think it was kind of bouncing around the room. But he told me privately, he just goes, yeah, I used to have a book on this. And I just mentioned the Twilight Zone episode, but this is a real story. He said, I read this book. I started practicing, controlling my universe. And with Sid, you have a guy in, the 30s as a child, born in 1933. He was able to draw things in 3D in his head. And obviously on paper. He was able to build cars out of construction paper that were just absolutely, precision perfect. So when you think about a guy that could conceive of reality as we know it, all the moving parts, he's the dude. Trust me, he's the dude. But he told me, he goes, look, I got so good at controlling the universe which is just his little pocket of influence. He said he came to a 4-way stop once here in Los Angeles. And he said, I got to a point where I felt like I was controlling whether or not everyone else was pushing a gas pedal, a brake pedal, signaling, looking at each other. And he said he had to, in his brain, usher the cars through that 4-way intersection. And then it was terrifying that he was responsible for controlling the cars, basically saying, look, I don't want to be responsible for people dying, people, driving off a cliff or whatever it is, walking across the street with the buses coming. Now, I would say that there's probably not another human being that I would easily digest that statement from, but with Sid, it's a whole different game. If I had 6 friends with me, totaling 7 folks that knew Sid right now, and I told that story and they had never heard it before, I can almost assure you 100% the rest of the folks sitting next to me would be like, oh yeah, I could totally see Sid getting to that level of consciousness. He was that kind of dude. But then, let's say that, we're solving the physics of the soul by divorcing ourselves from traditional physics, the mass-based world that we live in. We are literally saying, don't concentrate so much on the material world, I should say like the physical world, such that you can open up this more dreamlike state while you're awake. And it doesn't mean, losing your to-do list and not driving properly down the highway and then, you're dozing off going 80 miles an hour down the 405. I'm not talking about that. You may or may not want to experiment with this kind of thing when operating heavy equipment, right? But what's interesting is, I've had that experience with Walt, also with my grandmother who passed away. But what's interesting, since then, I haven't had any additional experiences that I'm aware of. There is that really strange thing that happens, and I'm not sure if it's something that's chemically happening inside my body, but a lot of us will have smells from the past that aren't capable of happening with the ingredients that you have in your home. The big one for me is I smell my grandmother's. One of my grandmothers would wear perfume before she'd go out or something like that, and it was just had a smell. And my other one, I don't think she wore that much perfume. But those scents are patented old scents that may or may not even be made anymore. Or if they are, they're not going to be in my house. And so when I experience that, it's interesting because it will last, 20, 30 seconds. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's still there. And then it fades away. Now, it could be something neurological where my brain is playing back a chemical pattern, or coincidentally, whatever is occurring in the room is causing this coincidental scent to occur. But what's fascinating about it, it's if you're a person that's ever had that happen, then you know that it's so specific that it's hard to blow it off, So the question would be, if you wanted to learn more about the physical world, you could go study ethereal sciences, then you could study physics, you could study chemistry, then biochem if you want to know how all of it applies to the human form. So what do you do when you want to study the soul, the spirit, the other probably more important, infinite form of existence? Because my body can die, and I have no doubt in my soul that I'm just going to float away from this thing, wherever I end up going. And the other one that really, seems to factor in my mind is just the entire process of being open-minded. It seems to play the biggest role in what kind of experiences that you have. Because I keep trying to figure out the correlation between dreaming and a sense of being in this realm that we're in. Meaning, why do I have friends who are completely clever, completely amazing people who, for whatever reason, don't dream? There must be some correlation that we just haven't figured out yet. In terms of being open-minded and dreaming and not dreaming, well, I've got some friends who I think are extremely closed-minded who don't dream. But I also have friends that are very open-minded that don't dream. It could be something more subconscious. It would be interesting because the interviews that we would have to have with individuals would have to be with individuals that believe that finding the truth of this answer is more important than any level of embarrassment they might have by admitting how their brain is currently working. I'll give you an example. Let's say someone has some anxiety that they're hiding, because anxiety that gains control over you would make you potentially seem weak to others. And so there is a force field going on inside your mind around pockets of things that could, I'm just throwing it out there, I don't have any data to suggest that what I'm saying is correct, but that could be restricting your open-mindedness to the spiritual realm. Simply because, as Brian Johnson said on Top Gear, he says when your butt makes the bunny nose gesture, when it perks up and tightens up, right? You don't want your brain to be all tightened. It's sort of like relaxing. And that's why, again, one of the greatest injustices, and I have to be very careful how I say this, this is my personal opinion and personal experience. When I took LSD the first time, I was interviewed for, probably 8 years before I was allowed to take any of this stuff, because my buddy wanted to make sure I was vetted. He didn't want me having a bad trip, and I had a most amazing trip. I've had 3 pretty amazing trips on this stuff. What it did for me is it took me to a place within this realm of existence where I could see the fluidity of creation. And it comes to you in metaphors. Laying on a sofa, my buddy goes, "Hey, lay down and close your eyes." And he was playing this really cool music. He's way back in his office, having other experiences with art and that kind of thing. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I was seeing artwork living in my brain. It was the most amazing, All I can describe it is that first time I did it, it was like the best Latin graffiti artists on earth, kind of getting mixed with Escher, kind of getting mixed with sort of Fantasia type bubbling of this art. And everyone who did the Disney's Fantasia was dropping acid like crazy. The danger today is that you'll get stuff that's billed as acid and it's not. It's something else, and it can permanently damage you. So if you're going to try and pursue that, be extremely careful. Only work with people who have a long history of attaining this stuff and having very pleasant experiences. I was very lucky to get the Grateful Dead dose 3 times. But the thing is that loosens your brain up. Now, I'd already had the Disney experience 6 years before I ever took a trip. But the interesting thing is when you loosen up your consciousness and you start to roll with the punches a lot better in life and just be relaxed, because you realize you're temporarily human. You really are, but you're permanently a soul. And you know what? Even though you might find yourself in a real lonely place as a human being, as soon as you pass away, you're going to be with the entire universe. And I almost think that the seclusion that you achieve as a human is almost like saying to the spiritual realm, I'm going to go on a vacation. I'm going to spend some time by myself. I'm going to get to know my soul a little bit better. And that's you transcending into a human body and living perhaps a more introverted life. And even if you did have a fairly decent family size and friends, comparatively to the infinite container of souls, well, that's still a sequestered little corner of the universe where you're going to sort of enjoy and then think about who you are. And I have no evidence that when you're in spiritual form you wouldn't know who you are, but I think it's the difference between knowing all things and knowing a limited amount of stuff. And you know, it would be as if you were living in a kind of utopian world where everything's taken care of you. Your toilet wipes your butt for you, however that works, right? It bidets you and dries you all in one set. So you don't even have to learn how to do that. Well, that experience would rob you of a fabric of who you are as a person if you had to do it. So coming down into a limited form as a human being, you're being forced to engage the normal autonomic system of the spiritual realm. You have needs that you don't even have in the other realm because you have a vessel that you live in. You must take care of it, eat well, exercise, etc. Now, there are a lot of people I meet that are wonderful people. And I think about, I'm listening to the way they form their words and how they structure things, how they interpret data. And when you're really relaxed as a human being, you can hear and feel tension in other people's bodies. You can feel the defensive nature of their being. They're just all wound up. And they're not necessarily like your super type A person. They're not like really massively anal retentive or anything like that. But they're definitely sort of protecting their realm. They've been through some stuff in life. It was a survival mechanism, perhaps, or at least their perception that they needed this tighter interpretation of reality, right? When I meet those folks, I'll sometimes say, you know, you might really like to do an acid trip. And what's funny about this is I was in the Bay Area. I was in San Jose with a buddy of mine who had done several trips. He was technically, I think, a couple of years younger than me. My buddy Jerry. Brilliant dude. Super cool. And I remember Jerry was just super duper relaxed and super brilliant, and he could just go, oh, okay, man, yeah, give me that. And he'd just do it. You know, it was great. Very extroverted, was a DJ in San Francisco. When we knew what a DJ was, you know, it was great. But he said to me once, walking into this diner, he looked at me once with this super wise look on his face, and he told me, he goes, you know what? He goes, I think you would really be benefited by having a trip. Now, technically speaking, what's really crazy about this, it was about 20 years later to the day that I ended up having an experience. And so I took a picture of myself laying out in the sun on my second trip, because I had forgotten about this huge connection he and I had at the time. And I posted on Instagram and I tagged him and I said, dude, you were right. You were totally right. I know now what he saw in me. He saw a very techno-geeky guy who was very successful, but still just wound up in my paradigms of thought process. I mean, I was getting off on the physical world more than the spiritual world, even though I'd already been through the Christian machine and very much enjoyed that, and definitely was interested in ghost stories and that kind of stuff from other people, but I had very little experience of my own, And consequently, what's interesting about the whole thing is I think my first trip was 2014, and then I did another one in 2015, and that's about the time I started this show. And so I felt like it really boosted what I was experiencing. The reason why I'm talking about this stuff, even though it's technically a drug conversation at this point, was it was one of the mechanisms I used to really expand my consciousness without the knowledge that that's what was going to occur. There are people who meditate and they can achieve all the things that people like me might experience with a drug. But then it begs the question, sorry, the dogs are going nuts. It begs the question, are we supposed to be that engaged with the spiritual realm as human beings? And that begs the question, is there a rule book somewhere? What's fascinating to me, as I started off the episode and said to you, the ancient cultures of Earth were extremely, extremely lucid in terms of the spiritual realm. And I think most people that reach back into history and all the shows I've ever seen, all the documentaries I've ever seen, YouTube documentaries where individuals are saying what they want to say and not being gagged by a network, is that we were potentially sharing this realm with the spiritual realm very fluently, I should say, in the past. The Day of the Dead, that's celebrated in South America for me, is very interesting. The Aborigines have their own version of that exact same thing. The Hindus, they manage their life as a half spiritual realm, half physical realm. Sorry, the dogs in my neighborhood are all doing their news updates. There's dogs like 2 blocks away I can hear barely, and the dogs here are barking back to them. It's pretty funny. So if you think about it being sort of an organic thing, right? The idea is we're obviously adopting more and more of our physical realm as it becomes more, imbued on us through media. By someone saying you should have expensive things and tangible things, and that's your entire definition of yourself. Well, imagine, you wake up every day. I just watched a show that's trying to be Top Gear or Grand Tour. 3 guys that are driving around their dream cars that they can afford. And the whole tense of the show, that they even spoke it in the intro, was that cars, fancy cars are really good for you because it makes you want to make the money to get the car, thus making you more professional and more accomplished to make money. And I could tell these 3 dudes, which are 3 consummate nerds, God bless them, that's all they've got. Probably tech guys, what have you. So that's their choice. It's cool, and they're having a great time. Wish them luck. They are definitely not Top Gear by any means. They're trying to copy that format, and maybe they'll get there at some point. They don't have the budget to be Top Gear, that's for sure. But it sort of hurt my soul to hear them so latch on to this tangible world. But, that's their preference. They're not hurting anybody, I don't think. So there's this trend in humanity where when you're young, say your teens, because your 10s, it depends on your family as to kind of who you are as a person. You're still just kind of like filtering reality to figure out where the hell you are. Once you're in your teens, though, you start getting indoctrinated in the material objects of the world. What I have found is that everyone gets more spiritual as they get older. which is why you'll have people like Steve Jobs, who was, I wouldn't say he was an atheist, but he was definitely kind of an agnostic person. Maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. Towards the end of his life, as the billions of dollars proved to him over and over and over again, it doesn't buy happiness, right? Look at interviews with Steve at 1994 when his company, the next company, had turned into an OS company. They stopped making hardware. Apple was going down the tubes, driving him nuts. The demon Bill Gates had stolen everything in his life, pretending to be a coder, just like Zuckerberg. All these fake geniuses that we have in the world. And so he's looking around going, what the hell? As he got towards his deathbed, he became spiritual. And I think it has to do with the fact that you start smelling the BS really early in life. Or I shouldn't say early in life, but you start smelling the BS eventually in life, and you simplify out of the material addictions that you have. And then what is left? You still have a brain that's working. I think there's a correlation as well. If you have built up a very meticulous mind by being a professional in whatever capacity you are, you have built up this incredibly elaborate machine that starts to be bored. Once you disengage from the material things, then what you have left is the spiritual realm. Now you can appreciate why I film during the nighttime. It's so much quieter at night, right? So here you have this machine that's beautifully developed, and it doesn't really have a hell of a lot to do anymore because you're not so preoccupied like the three guys making that show. All right. Then spirituality can start to render itself. The other added sort of dimension to waking up is as people start to pass away, the older that you get, your elders start to die. Well, you're contemplating the afterlife routinely. Maybe your first parent dies, your first grandparent dies, and you're like, hope grandma, grandpa, are in a better place. You don't really put much thought into it. And then the other one goes, and the other one goes, and then your friend goes, and then your mom and dad go, or whatever the sequence is. And you're constantly bombarded with this question as to what you believe about a spiritual realm. Well, the less you are bound to this tangible existence, the spiritual realm starts to surround you without death, being a catalyst. I don't know about you, but when I started studying cosmology, because I started in subatomic physics, so it was very, in my mind's eye, it was very Earth, laboratory. We are sensing small particles, we're figuring out fission and fusion and that sort of thing. It was very earthbound. When I started studying cosmology, then you start the larger view of the universe all at one time. You see it as a picture in your mind of potentially, and again, doesn't matter if this stuff is what we think it is or isn't what we think it is. It still causes the brain to become aggro, or I should say, huge. You start to go out there and start to think about things being way bigger than you, which is synonymous with the way I think most people would view any type of afterlife realm, heavenly realm, that it is, by any definition, an infinite thing. So once you teach your brain through one discipline, infinity, and how you're going to contemplate infinity, mathematicians have to think about infinity all the time. It hurts the soul to think about it, right? Because we're in this limited vessel. It's just training wheels. It's just training wheels for your mind to get ready for this bigger experience. What starts to make me think is that, what if you were a parent that was wise enough to imbue your children with this sort of omnipotent view of the universe, both from a matter realm and from a spiritual realm? What would a child end up achieving in terms of realizations and sort of epiphanies about the universe had they started earlier? Especially if they were taught, in say their late teens, okay, here's what's going to happen, my dear child. You're going to be inundated with material possessions as being the most important things in your life. The clothes that you wear, the car that you drive, the place that you live. And it's not bad necessarily to experience those things, but be careful committing yourself to that as a priority in life above and beyond the thing that you really are, which is your soul. Your soul's going to go off forever. So as you develop your preferences in life, you need to understand that the accountability that, again, I keep talking about, that occurs in a small town. Everybody knows you. You can't be rude to people because the word will spread. And, you'll have a hard time getting service anywhere. You'll have a hard time finding a partner because everyone's going to be like, I'm not marrying that guy or that girl because they're a jerk. Well, I'm not saying there's a lot of penalties in the other world, but who knows? As it is above, so too is it below. The idea that accountability is just sort of a base of thinking and operation in our realm of existence, and suddenly, because your vessel dies, you have no accountability on the other side. It's sort of strange. My assumption at this point in my life is that if you are observed by all, you don't behave the same way when you're not being observed by all. You say things that are mean to people at times when you're younger, to perhaps your boyfriend, girlfriend, or your spouse, or maybe even your kid on accident, or a friend. But if the entire universe was watching you say things, you tend to behave. People that get on shows like, I guess, Jerry Springer, they're supposed to let it roll in the most acidic way to create ratings. But when you're on a show like Oprah or something, you're in this sort of warm, fuzzy world. You're not supposed to be a jerk, and so you don't. Those are bad examples for shows, but I'm thinking that inherently the design of the afterlife is more in the presence of all life. And so committing a sin in that realm might just be technically impossible. Because when you can't do things that would be against the system, you just can't. It's not even possible. You just simply exist and you have a good time. I've been trying to study lately, the idea that when we dream, how much of our dreams can include potentially like sinful things. And I think it's a mixed bag of potential. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. The one thing I found interesting with dreams is that sometimes if I'm in a committed relationship in this world, and then I dream, and I can get into a situation where, who I am as a person in this realm is not acknowledged in the other realm. So sometimes my committed partner in this realm is not in my dream realm. And then sometimes it's a hybrid. I will be with a girl who's just a dream person, don't know. Maybe we're doing something we're not supposed to be doing, if I'm in a committed relationship. And maybe not. But if nothing else, I'm just with this person. I'm spending time with this person, something I would rarely do, obviously, in this realm. If I was in a committed relationship, it would have to be a very special circumstance. And then I'll change rooms, and there's my girlfriend. And so in a dream, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm in a relationship. And it's sort of an introduction of what your life is in the outside world. You weren't aware of those commitments at the beginning of your dream. And so you can wake up feeling kind of like, oh gosh, I was just naughty there. It's crazy, right? What happens when we are committed in this realm and you think you have a soulmate, which you very might well have, and you die together and you ascend to the other side? The big question is, are you spending the rest of eternity with that person? My grandmother, for instance, she was in a relationship in high school with a gentleman. They were engaged. He goes to World War II and dies in the war. Then she marries my grandfather, who then she obviously spends, 50 years with or so. And so she's obviously more committed to, in terms of time spent together with my grandfather. But there was still a big part of her soul that even when I was in my late teens, she was finally telling me about this guy. She wept like I've never seen her cry ever. I've rarely ever seen her cry ever anyway. And she went and got a picture and showed him to me, and he looked just like me. That's what the nutty part was. He's a much bigger guy than me, but I think. But anyway, she still had this heartbreak in her, I guess it would have been 60s, of this gentleman that she was going to marry after the war was over. So what happens with that situation? He never took a partner in this world because he died. She never married him because he died. So what happens in the afterlife with the commitment? What if you were married 2 or 3 times? And, let's just say you're married twice, okay? And for whatever reason, you felt like you grew apart, your relationship, your marriage blew up in the first one, and you get divorced, and then you remarry, and you're very happy with the person you remarried, but you still have, perhaps you're the one that got dumped, you still have a love for your first wife. Let's just put it on the guys here. But even she realizes the reasons why we broke up were simply due to adolescence. We reacted too quickly. Culture says get divorced the second anything goes wrong. And so you both pass at some point, and you love both people. In this realm, it's important to own other human beings. We feel like we can own other human beings, and that's what I think pop culture wants you to believe. And so it's interesting. I've had conversations this year with individuals who, my God, they were divorced, and it was just an acquaintance. And I remember talking, and this woman was telling me sort of examples of what her husband had done wrong. And, he may have been up to some shiesty stuff, who knows. But when she's telling me all these rules that she lived by, I was like, oh my gosh, that is like, this dude must have been utterly quarantined to be around her. And the second he steps out of her vision, she was like, you're cheating on me. You're doing something horrible. Or why would you do that? I would never do that. And it got obsessive. It got crazy and got obsessive. And so the reason why I'm mentioning that is if you view yourself as a soul descending on this plane of existence to create a physical body, there are all of these standards that we have in the physical world, some of which we definitely need, and some, the way I look at a relationship, even a marriage, would be that person is electing to be with you. At no point, like I say in several episodes, are you getting to a point of like being burden free of bringing to the table what made the relationship work in the first place. But that is sort of a classic thing that happens with new couples. The younger that you are when you get married, it just depends on your upbringing. But I know in the Midwest, you will get a lot of folks that seem to understand you got to keep whatever physical fitness you had, whatever you were attracted to initially. If 2 heavy people marry each other and they can stay heavy. But if you're more fit, then you usually stay fit, right? But then over time in the Midwest, as things pass on, they will potentially get more drifted, where they kind of move away from their previous commitments. And then the marriage breaks up. In the big city, what I have seen more of is just the second you get married, it can just go it can explode and be absolutely chaotic. So it's an interesting thing because there's more pressure on you in a big city to adopt a bunch of standards that aren't your standards. Or it's so chaotic, you can't pick one and be satisfied because the big city says that everything has trends, including how you treat other human beings. I think these conversations are extremely important because this is sort of the pull your head back from the reality that you think you're living and take a deep breath, erase out of your buffer all of these commitments you've made to this reality and see if you still believe in what you're seeing. See if the things you thought were important that were just indoctrinated into you, perhaps from society, your family, are still important. What you'll find in a lot of cases is that the things your parents taught you, your grandparents or whatever, have been lost and replaced and usurped by really bad standards in life. And so it's good to recapture what is important to you. Somehow, in my opinion, and this is where there's a sort of switch up, there's a either-or situation, which I'm not sure. It would seem that either ether can provide a control mechanism for your soul to latch on, or your soul is creating sort of waves of ether that dictate what you physically become. I tend to think at this stage there is more of an ethereal trap that the soul then enjoys inhabiting. But if you think about it, and if you believe in a soul, then you can't get the life that we see without it. And it would mean that anything that's alive, that we at least know metabolizes life force, a plant, fish, an insect, a human being, all the beings on this planet, they all seem to dream. They all seem to sleep. Just because, a tree doesn't kick its root at night, it doesn't have any belief that, let's just say it doesn't have a conscious moment where it's walking around the universe so that when it sleeps, it shakes its, root. But a little dog does. A little cat does. I'm sure all kinds of wild animals do it. We're just not around to see it happen. When you see an insect behave extremely brilliantly, and it's only a few minutes old, it's only a few days old. Some of these little bugs only live like a couple days from the moment they're born. There's something going on. The circuitry in their little microscopic minds doesn't account for the genius of their behaviors. Think about these little fish that create these little sanctuaries in the sand to attract a female fish. They create these geometric shapes of which you would see in light if you took an acid trip. Isn't that amazing? How's that possible, right? You see birds that do these dances to sway another bird. They're barely alive, on this planet for any length of time. Imagine the lifespan of an insect or a bird compared to your own child. It takes your child, 4 years to usually figure out how to wipe their butt, if they're quick. It takes a human child, it depends, 6 months probably would be the earliest moment that a human child would walk upright. Part of it has to do with the physicality of the proportions and the balancing system. But there's not a whole hell of a lot of difference between, a kid walking at 9 months, like my kid, and a kid walking at 1.5 years. They're physically okay. But, think about an insect. Think about a brand new horse. They're just born and boom, they walk. It's instantaneous. For me, that has to do with outer programming. Not just instinctual circuitry that's been passed down throughout the synapses, right? It's a fascinating realm of conversation. And what's interesting about just this simple little episode is that go to college and try to find this conversation anywhere. Best colleges in the entire world. Tell me if you've ever had a college course that just focused on such a thing. Because how many days and weeks and months, and potentially years, would you have to actually focus on this to turn it into a science? You immediately contradict traditional science because a scientist, a nerd, who's going to walk in the room trying to maintain a self-importance ego thing, is going to tell you, you're an idiot for even believing this stuff in the first place. You're a weak-minded person, is what they say. When the inverse is probably more accurate. So this is the kind of world we live in, where these kind of conversations probably rattle around inside your head, but no one talks about it. Let me ask you, if you have good friends around you that you love dearly, have you ever sat around drinking a beer and just talking about this kind of stuff? Can you go to your parent and talk about this kind of stuff? Besides just someone saying you do have a soul, at least that's an opening belief system that's interesting. I don't know if man is supposed to recapture what man seemed to have a long time ago. It seems logical, doesn't it? We started off seemingly one with our souls, one with the afterlife. And if you're an anthropologist and you study burial rituals, my big question to you is, why do you think those burial rituals seem to have developed all around the world? And it seems that is a level of enlightenment from that society that is not just missing those that passed away, but understanding the cycle of it all. Think about the Egyptians that seem to have believed, or whoever those folks were that really built that place. They definitely believed in an afterlife, and you had to take your stuff with you. It's very interesting how they melded the physical with the spiritual. You have Christians who believe you turn into a soul, and you have Latter-day Saints that think you're going to be taking your body with you. For me, taking your body with you is, in one realm, sort of a cowardice approach to the afterlife. You're terrified of changing into a butterfly, so you want to take your caterpillar body with you. Why don't you just relax a little bit and let it happen? See what goes on. Maybe you do. Maybe you go into some other thing, but recreating a dead body here on Earth seems strange. I mean, who are the engineers that in these three celestial realms is going to, like, okay, you had them all on your set. What was your hair again? Oh yeah, strawberry blonde. Yeah. What age would you like to be? Oh yeah. Well, you remember when you had that age, you still had your pancreas, and it was or whatever, and it was messed up, or it just seems strange to want to recreate such a thing. But this is how we deal with it. Everything you've ever experienced dictates how comfortable you are with these concepts that seem to be very intangible. Anyway, let me know what you think. Let me know if this is the kind of conversation that rattles around in your mind every once in a while. If you have any perceptions, please share them in the comments, because I definitely want to hear what you have to say. And on that note, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. Everything you need is up there. We have an all-new remastered Season 1 on a different channel. We have a store with some pretty cool shirts. For those of you who support the channel on Patreon and PayPal, thank you so much. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.